किन लोगों के लिए बायोहैकिंग समझना ज़रूरी है?
So if you care about being healthy and not just managing diseases, then biohacking is for you.
So, what is one thing that people kept believing in health and still getting it wrong?
Popping pills because they're available without prescription.
मॉडर्न ह्यूमन क्या इतने मेडिकल एडवांसमेंट के बाद बायोलॉजिकली वीकर हो गए हम लोग?
For sure. We are living longer, but we are much more unhealthier.
10,000 steps I have completed, so it's enough. So, do you think it's enough?
It's not exercise.
If you're gaining weight means you're healthy. Now it's gone opposite, like you don't need so much food. In fact, cut down on your food.
So I think the calorie obsession should completely stop. What I want you to do is optimize protein. Weight drops like this.
What is epigenomics?
Each of us are born with the same DNA in every single cell.
Whether chronic stress genetically can change your physical body as well?
Epigenomically, yes. And then you end up with autoimmune diseases, you end up with inflammatory diseases, accelerated aging, losing your muscle and your bone density because you don't have the capacity to do anything else.
What are the habits that are silently damaging brain health?
First, very high glucose load in our diet. Number 2 is not building enough muscle. Third is the chronic stress. Pay attention to sleep.
Alzheimer's and the neurodegeneration, like does it starts like decades ago and before any symptoms appear?
Oh, absolutely. They said that the Alzheimer's that happens in 80s started in the 30s. The diabetes that happened in the 50s started in the 20s. The immobility, ability to not get up from bed that happens in the 70s actually also started in the 30s.
We call gut our second brain.
The gut feeling is actually a gut feeling.
So, like in order to take care of our brain, we have to take care of our gut first.
I think in order to take care of anything when it comes to health, we should take care of our gut first.
Age reversal is real.
Age reversal doesn't mean you're going to look like you're 20 years old when you're 70.
What happens at a cellular level and autophagy when achieved in a fasted state?
When you go into a deep fasted state, you're allowing the body to pause and actually clean itself up, clean all of this dead buildup.
I want to talk about NMN and NAD. Fasted state के अंदर cancer cells भी मर जाते हैं इसके साथ में. What should be the frequency if one needs to introduce after following the pyramid structure?
Like I see people doing 17-18 hour fasted windows every single day and then fasting for a good 48 hours once a week. A good extended fasting window for a non-perimenopausal menopausal woman once to twice a month is good enough.
Where do you rate dark chocolate and alcohol for brain damage and brain health?
Super. Dark chocolate 100 for brain health, alcohol -100 for brain damage.
Welcome back to another episode of Raw Reflections. Today we have Tanya Malik Chawla with us. She's a biohacker, functional medicine expert, and a neurogenomics researcher.
In a world where fatigue, hormonal imbalances, stress, chronic illnesses have become so common today, we hardly stop and ask our bodies why they are struggling the way they are. So today we are diving deep into the science of metabolism, aging, hormones, and how our lifestyle is shaping our long-term health.
Hi Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was just talking to Devashri कि biohacking हम दोनों अपनी लाइफ में काफ़ी टाइम से कर रहे हैं, but we are not doing it on a very data-driven approach. We are doing it like conscious choices that we can incorporate as a couple कि healthy lifestyle में fiber खाना है, थोड़ा प्रोटीन लेना है, we have to sleep on time, एक required amount of sleep, movement आना है, but we need more scientific approach, and that's where we thought कि somebody who's smart, who is into this field can add a lot of value to what we are doing, and a lot of people who are looking for some more focused approach, that's where expertise should come in.
Superb. I'm glad both of you are looking at it from this lens. First off, everything that you shared is in the right direction. But yes, when it comes to health, specifically when it comes to biohacking, I personally believe that only when something is measured, it can be managed correctly. So data needs to be the fundamental aspect. In fact, a lot of people ask me what biohacking is. And I often say that it's just understanding your biology, because the whole idea of biohacking is that what is working for me may or may not work for you, and what is working for her may or may not work for you. So it's understanding what works for your biology, which cannot happen without data.
So every individual is different, and our system is different, our organs are different, our parameters are different. So that is measuring that is actually biohacking is what exactly you mean?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. Just adding a couple more layers, right? Because not only is one person different from the other person, I am different from what I was 10 years ago, right? हम पीछे देख के ये नहीं कह सकते what I was 10 years ago मैं exactly वैसी हूँ. Even from a nature standpoint, right? हम change होते रहते हैं. So why is it any different from a biological standpoint? Our biomarkers keep changing. The smallest shift in our environment can considerably change how our body responds.
I can relate to that because few years back I used to like certain kind of food, and now I don't, or I am allergic to. So our
Right.
body is continuously changing, and hence what you're saying makes sense.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought that up, right? Because not sure if you guys have heard, but if you see lot of people who have food allergies or autoimmune diseases will come and say, "Yaar, autoimmune disease is your immune system reacting to something." And they assume it's genetic, right? So then they'll say, how come I never had it and I've suddenly got it when I'm 30 or when I'm 40? That's exactly what happens, because even our genes, right, even our DNA, yes, it's a code that we are born with, but not every strand or every piece of code is playing out consistently. That's where I keep talking about epigenetics, because it's so powerful that DNA is the blueprint that we are born with, but epigenomics decides which code or which DNA will turn on and which stays turned off. And epigenomics is influenced by every single thing. The food you're eating, the exercise you're doing, your sleep, your environment, the content you're watching, the conversations that you're having, the culture and the belief system that you hold. You see somebody who'll move from one country to the other, suddenly you'll see that their whole biological system or their body type starts to shift.
किन लोगों के लिए बायोहैकिंग समझना ज़रूरी है? क्या वो एक सर्टेन एज ग्रुप के हैं और दे आर ऑलरेडी स्ट्रगलिंग विद समथिंग? क्यों ज़रूरी है बायोहैकिंग?
इसका ये आंसर कर सकते हैं, हेल्थ किसके लिए ज़रूरी है. जिसके लिए हेल्थ ज़रूरी है, मेरे ओपिनियन में द ओनली डिफरेंस फ्रॉम जो हम कर रहे थे इतनी व्हाटएवर सेंचुरीज से टू वाई बायो हैकिंग इज बिकमिंग अ कॉन्वर्जेशन में सिर्फ एक डिफरेंस है. रादर देन आउटसोर्सिंग योर हेल्थ, इफ़ यू अंडरस्टैंड दैट healthy living के लिए हम खुद ही responsible हैं. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. See, I come from a family of doctors, so absolutely love and understand what the medical system does. But medical system की responsibility क्या है? To keep us alive. And they're doing a great job at that, right? Lifespans have increased. But alive आपको कब रखेंगे? जब कोई disease है, जब किसी ऑर्गन में कुछ इशू हो गया. देयर जॉब इज़, ये सिम्टम है, ये ऑर्गन में ये इशू है, इसको ये दवाई देते हैं सो दैट सिम्टम सप्रेस हो सके, ये इंसान जिंदा रह सके. स्टेइंग अलाइव इज़ नॉट द सेम एज बीइंग हेल्दी. Being disease suppressed or symptom free is not the same as being healthy. So if you care about being healthy and not just managing diseases, then biohacking is for you.
So what is one thing that people kept believing in health and still getting it wrong or doesn't work anymore?
It never used to work, but I think thode people have started now understanding it. Just popping pills because they're available without prescription. Biggest one that I see which has caused so much harm is an antacid. हम इसको seriously बिल्कुल नहीं लेते because I understand that, things like paracetamol, we understand it's a medicine. Somehow we don't look at an antacid as a medicine, and I don't understand why. थोड़ा सा बाहर खा लिया, people are popping an antacid. Today I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm popping an antacid. When I start working with somebody, I ask them, are you on any medication? They will be having antacids almost every day for a decade, but they'll say, nahi, no medication. And then I have to deep dive. Acha, ye khate ho kya? Wo khate ho kya? It does so much harm, but we don't recognize it.
मॉडर्न ह्यूमन क्या इतने मेडिकल एडवांसमेंट के बाद क्या बायोलॉजिकली वीकर हो गए हम लोग?
For sure. We are living longer, but we are much, much, much more unhealthier.
Why do you say that?
Look at the life we are living. All the quick commerce khana is like on our fingertips. Packaged foods, all of the additives. We care about shelf life more than we care about nutrition. That's the life that we are living. And then content. I myself am on social, but we know what social media does to us. We are scrolling rather than conversing. Before sleeping, people come and talk to me about having bad sleep, and then I have to really, really dig deep to understand, is this a biochemical issue, or are you just doing a lot of content consumption and stressful content consumption when you should be sleeping? So nervous system, मैं इसके बारे में बहुत बात करती हूँ that while yes, I call this a design stack. ठीक है, it's like a pyramid. कि अगर हम बहुत फंडामेंटल लेयर पे बायोहैकिंग या लॉन्जिविटी साइंस को देखेंगे तो सबसे पहले आता है स्लीप. उसके बाद देन इट इज़ अ न्यूट्रिशन. where we are lagging in terms of protein intake, healthy fat, we are just having a lot of processed tasty food, right? Then is your movement. So strength training, we are missing the biggest metabolic and longevity currency, which is muscle. Then उसके ऊपर आता है central nervous system, which we just don't talk about. All of us are living in the wired and tired phase. I call it this. This is so common. I'm going to share an example, a rather recent case. I know I talk about this very often, and it's a case report I released. Young girl, 26 years old, diagnosed with PCOS. Right? She didn't get her periods for almost 5 years. Given all the medication, and you can possibly imagine, so OCPs, metformin, सब कुछ, periods आ ही नहीं रहे. She comes to me, I look at her entire blood work, and I recognize that yes, insulin resistance hai, so metformin is not wrong per se. But when I dig a little bit deeper, I understand that cortisol levels are above 39, elevated. Cortisol is the stress hormone, right? Very important, but you've got to see kaun se range mein hai. Prolactin levels, which is almost your biological break to ovulation because the body doesn't feel safe. Also close to 39, 40, I don't remember exactly, but above 35 for sure. And immediately I started understanding her entire lifestyle, life structure, काम में क्या हो रहा है, life में क्या हो रहा है, and I recognized it's got nothing to do with anything else other than high extreme stress. What did we correct? Complete central nervous system work. How do you reduce your stress levels? How do you improve your sleep? How do you do everything around your lifestyle to support the central nervous system? 2 months periods came back.
So you are saying, let's say this girl, she might have nutrition in place, she might be sleeping properly, but one of the 4 pillars that you explained, the central nervous system was not in line, and once that got fixed, everything started working together.
I'm glad you asked this, because see, this is what happens when we look at health from a reductive lens, which is what we are used to doing from healthcare. कि heart में कुछ problem है, सिर्फ heart को देखते हैं. Body doesn't work like that, right? Everything is interconnected. Your body at no point is going to say that liver to अकेले काम कर रहा है and the digestive system is, or let's say the stomach is working in isolation. Your body is a whole. Everything is talking to everything. Everything is interconnected. So a lot of times when people come to me with high cholesterol, I'm often not looking at your diet for high cholesterol. I'm looking at your liver health. I'm looking at your muscle health. Because those things are going to fix your cholesterol. Why is it building up is not always happening there. If the problem is hormonal, doesn't mean that there is a hormonal driven disease. Look at the entire system. It could be something entirely different.
For how long a person can continue, even if out of the 4 pillars he is getting 3 things right maximum time, but he is ignoring the sleep part? For me, it happened for most of my time that okay, 6 घंटे निकाल लिए, 4 घंटे निकाल लिए, nutrition सही चल रहा है ना, stress बिल्कुल नहीं है, I'm trying to sleep, नहीं आ रहा है, 4 घंटे सो जाऊंगा. To what extent I can go and how it's going to affect my health in the long run?
So it's going to be different for different people, and I'm going to take your example, right? You are saying the bottom part of the pillar. ये जो pyramid है, pyramid में the reason I make it a pyramid is because सबसे नीचे वाला part, like when we are making a building, the foundation has to be the strongest. Just remember that you are missing on the fundamental piece while everything else is correct. So at some point when you reach a point of imbalance, the whole system will collapse. Right? Beach wala let's say for example, somebody sleeping well, eating well, moving well, central nervous system pe kaam nahi kar rahe, imbalances will slowly happen. In your case, the foundation is going to get sort of taken away. So Jenga khelte hain na, you remove one and then the whole block falls.
Out of so many trends you have watched online about biohacking, which you think is the utter nonsense and which one actually works? Out of everything, one that actually works and one is a complete nonsense.
This crazy trend, which a lot of people have started, that biohacking is about spending a lot of money on crazy gadgets and doing, all of the fancy things that you see a lot of people on social media doing. It isn't. The biggest trend that works is that if you've got your sleep correct, everything else can get built. I think that's absolutely on point.
Since we are talking about trends, we also say that we hear a lot that, okay, 10,000 steps I have completed, so it's enough. So do you think it's enough or we need more?
That's the definition of most of, even my father says, 10,000 steps ke liye we are healthy.
We are healthy. Great. Okay, so walking is not exercise. Just go back a little bit. What did our ancestors do? And we always keep giving this example, but मेरे grandparents तो ये नहीं करते थे. but most of them were in agriculture. Walking was just normal life. It was not their work. Then they used to work in the farm where they were really lifting heavy, using every single muscle of their body. Machines did not exist, the kind of machines we have for agriculture today. So obviously today also farmers work really, really hard, but imagine the amount of hard work they used to do. We are we are comparing one little portion and then thinking we've got it all sorted. We're sitting all day. 10,000 steps is just compensating for this sitting from a very simple movement lens. It's not exercise. It is to say that I have lived my day like a human being. You have not exercised. It's not building muscle. It's not putting pressure on your bones. It is absolutely not doing anything that's going to counter the degradation that happens with age. So it's not supporting your metabolic health from a muscle standpoint. Of course, it's great for digestion, it's great for movement, it's great for your brain, but it's just normal day's life. It's not exercise.
Another trend is like I can see you're also both of you are wearing a tracker. So there's so many wearables available and people on social media talking about it, wearing it, flaunting it. Do you think we are just so much data driven and obsessed about it?
Yes and no, both. When you know what to do with that data, then it can be very, very helpful. But if you're just gathering data because somebody else on social is doing it, then it's noise. Plus, I have a lot of people who I am working very deeply with, and then they ask me what wearable should I wear. And for half of them, I say nothing. Because they're in such a state of stress where I think additional data is just going to become more stress. And I'm like, just work on the fundamentals. Let's get things right first. Bring data in the picture when data can be helpful. I like to think of our body as an organization. Think you're running a business, right? The CEO is going to need some data. The CFO is going to need different data. The COO is going to need some other data. A manager of a department is going to need a completely different set of data. You decide whose hat you are wearing for your body at what point in time. And then decide what data you need or if you need any data at all.
Last night, just while we worked, we were actually preparing for this podcast, and throughout the night we were not able to sleep. I don't want to see my data because I know the numbers will be red, and I was really ashamed. So I understand that I recently started looking at my data more from, because sleep was always my weak forte and I want to get my sleep right, because I do agree with you, once your sleep gets right, everything falls in place.
Absolutely.
I wanted to use data in such a way that how I'm helping myself and what I can do better. From your expertise, what biomarkers one should start looking at, or any health parameters they should start looking at once they hit the age of 30?
Basic sleep quality first. You don't need a variable for it. How you're feeling, how many hours you're sleeping. Second, your fasting insulin. Nobody's looking at fasting insulin. For some reason, when people come to me with panels that the doctor demanded, and I almost always know, and it's true, fasting insulin is missing. I don't know why. They're looking at fasting glucose. Thankfully, they're looking at HbA1c. But fasting insulin is going to show you what is happening years before glucose shifts. That's when you want to catch it, and that's when you want to fix it. So fasting insulin. In your lipid panel, your ApoB, your LDL, your LP little a, and your HDL levels. Nobody cares about HDL levels. And of course, triglycerides, while it's part of lipids, I like to club it with fasting insulin. Then I want you to look at your inflammation markers. HSCRP, ESR, acute and systemic inflammation. Right? I think this is fundamentals that you can start with. And I mean, I like to throw in a CBC so you can look at your RDW value, so you just know if your nutrition status is fine. If you go a little bit deeper, homocysteine levels, because you can see cardiovascular and neurological stressors, and just correct your B vitamins if that's on the higher side. This is fundamentals. This is like the starting again, the bottom of the pyramid from a marker standpoint. Start with this. Sleep and these markers, that is it. Just start here. If this is fixed, then you can move forward.
What kind of patients you see? Like, are they more biohack driven, or what age you find them like they are more focused on how they want to program and hack their body?
Largely 35 plus. Majority of the people I work with are 35 plus. I'd say about 70% are above 35, and then in the other 30%, about 20% is above 30. 5% I'll have between 25 and 30, who are either, and that 5% is either somebody struggling with an already diagnosed issue and they've not been able to correct it. And very seldom, I can't think of a single who comes without an issue at that age. So yeah, that age is only when they're struggling with something. Above 30, it's usually when they have really taken health seriously and they want to improve performance, or they've started biohacking and now they want to understand how to track biomarkers and, really kind of optimize and do all of the things that they're seeing on social media but don't know how to do it. Above 35 is the serious lot, right? They understand health is currency. They've reached a point where they have started feeling experiential decline. Specifically with women, things become really real, right? They suddenly don't understand what's happening, and because it's not a disease, doctors are not able to tell them what's going on, and it's just, sort of aligned as this is normal, this is just aging, this is just hormonal, but they're really struggling. So they come from a very serious perspective of wanting to understand and really putting in the work. Very similar case with men. Men become slightly older. It's usually closer to 40. And either something has happened in their peer group or they are struggling. For me, with men, the largest piece is gut health. It starts with gut. And then this is this age group. The younger ones are all high performers. They really want to optimize their performance. Otherwise, from a slightly, I'm not going to say old, I'm 40 myself, but from the 40 age group, it's about either gut starts to fall apart or something is happening which they're not able to figure out, or the body is not responding to workout the way it used to respond. So there's an experiential trigger, or their friend has done it and their friend has then referred saying, this has really made a big difference.
But according to you, at what age anyone should start biohacking their life?
Again, as young as possible. So, I wouldn't even call it biohacking, right? Just taking ownership of your health, I'm saying as young as possible. So, I have seen people as young as, actually my youngest case is 9 years old. Of course, the mum got the reports, and there was vitamin D deficiency. There was very, very low grade insulin resistance. Of course, too young to do anything. You just want to fix the diet and you want to say, go play a little bit and get into the sunlight. But as early as that, specifically teenagers, we are seeing a lot of vitamin D deficiency and vitamin B deficiency. So ideally, looking at very basic levels of biomarkers from a nutrition standpoint should start as early as that. Parents should start taking things seriously, because I'm going to be venting now a little bit, because this is something I see so often. You know how parents in India now approach nutrition. I don't think they did that earlier, but at least my age group, parents or even younger, they're just looking at khana kha liya na, that's okay. So I see this in my family, that the kid is roaming around, because kids are kids, right? They're not going to sit down and say, okay, serve me a healthy meal. So we are all together and the kid is running around, and the kid had like a piece of brownie or had a chocolate or had a rasgulla, and the mom is like, theek hai, he's eaten something. That's not food. Where is the nutrition going from? The kid is sick and the kid is demanding for a pizza, and they're like, okay, let him have a pizza, at least he's eaten. I'm like, the kid is sick, the kid needs nutrition to heal. So parents' mindset, I think, should shift to understand that just looking at health and nutrition should start as soon as the child is born. For ourselves, if you're talking about very serious health interventions, then 30.
You rightly said that previously our parents were just worried about whether my mom kept telling me that, you're so thin, you're so thin, you're so thin.
Right.
Just eat, whatever.
Yeah, just put food inside the belly.
Yeah, and if you're gaining weight means you're healthy. That was another misconception, that if you're a little chubbier, then you're healthy. And if you're, and now it's gone opposite. Like you don't need so much food. In fact, cut down on your food.
Right.
Yeah, you don't need to eat so much.
I think that's the problem. And this is something that I really hold against the entire dieting or dietitians movement that happened about 20 odd years ago in India, where the narrative around eating or healthy eating just became calorie obsessive. Food is calories. Food is not calories. Food is signal. Food is nutrition. What we eat is literally signaling our epigenomics, right? Epigenomics are going to tell which DNA needs to turn on or turn off. What's the inflammation load of the food matters. Then what protein, what fat, what carbs, that matters. So I think the calorie obsession should completely stop. And somebody who comes to me, and a lot of women come because they want to lose weight. That's just the cultural aspect, right? And I always tell them, forget the calorie counter, forget the weighing machine. What I want you to do is optimize protein. Weight drops like this. Start lifting some weights. The weighing scale might go up, but your clothes are going to become loose. Something so simple. I think that little shift of understanding that what we are putting into our system is a signal, and it's nutrition which is going to keep us alive, healthy, not calories. It's not a number. Our body doesn't care about calories.
प्लीज़ बताएं मुझे what is epigenomics, और इसको समझने के लिए what kind of simpler language or terms
I'll try and use some examples. Let's assume हमारे फ़ोन में बहुत सारे apps download होते हैं, right? So let's say if my phone has some 20 applications. But for most phones, at a given point in time, सारे apps तो नहीं चल रहे होंगे. So कौन सा app on है, कौन सा app off है, is decided by epigenomics. Apps is your DNA. When you're loading a gun and you put the bullet inside, that is your genetics. Now I've kept the loaded gun here. Doesn't mean that I've shot somebody. But when I pick up and I shoot the gun, that process of shooting, what I am doing is epigenomics. Right? So again, if I make it simpler, each of us are born with the same DNA in every single cell, right? So whether it's a skin cell, whether it's a liver cell, it has the exact same DNA. How does the skin cell know it needs to be skin? How does the liver cell know it needs to be liver?
So epigenomics.
Epigenomics. So it's like a bookmark. So let's say if I'm holding a book and it's on page 107. So next time when I open the book, I'll open on page 107 and start reading there. That's exactly how the body works. The DNA has a code. This particular cell knows I have to start reading from here and not before that. Right? That's basic epigenomics that keeps us alive. We also inherit this from our parents. Ancestral inheritance. Somebody once asked me, do you know that genetics doesn't change, right? From ancestor to, like, from person to person, because we're all inheriting the same DNA. But what changes is epigenomics. So I'll give you my example. I have what I call the FTO gene. I mean, I don't call it the FTO gene. It's called the FTO gene. It's basically, in very simple words, called the obesity gene. So people who have this gene, and we get one from our mother, one from our father, that we all understand, right? So if we get two for any DNA, if we get two strands, one can be compromised, the other's working fine, you'll have that system working half. If you have both compromised, then you have that system not working properly. I have both for the FTO gene. So for all means and purposes, if we just go by genetics, I should have not been able to manage my weight at all. Right? My muscle mass would have not been there. I would have been, for means and purposes, overweight or obese. I was, by the way, when I was younger. So for these people, what happens for people like me, satiety signal, the body's ability to understand now I'm full and I have to stop eating, is not properly working. The ability to balance and manage glucose is not necessarily properly working. Now, this is the genetics. This is what I was born with, right? I'm giving this example easy for us to understand. By simply increasing my protein intake to 2 grams per kg of my body weight every single day, the signal that protein sends my system suppresses this gene. So this gene doesn't get turned on at all. So the process of changing my food is a lever that has influenced the epigenomics, which has covered this gene and suppressed it. Yeah, it's basically the lever that decides which gene or which DNA needs to get switched on, or which app in your phone needs to get turned on and which app needs to stay turned off or even sort of removed from the home screen.
Okay, since you're talking about genetics, now you said that sleep is the foundation, right? Another factor plays a major role in our health is stress. Now tell me whether chronic stress genetically can change your physical body as well?
Epigenomically, yes. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So and I also want to differentiate between stress and chronic stress, because a lot of us misunderstand that, right? तो क्या होता है कि stress को हमने इतना demon बना दिया है that थोड़ा सा भी काम में if there is stress, we're like, oh my god, I'm gonna fall sick.
Yeah,
ऐसे नहीं होता.
Yeah, like when I was doing the research for this podcast, one of the doctor said very rightly that, you know, पहले के टाइम में stress used to be like hunting, not getting killed, and you know, खाना शिकार करो and all of that. Survival was the stress, and nowadays what stress is like, oh, my maid income, or oh, you know, I'm putting on weight, or oh, like I'm just not getting too many engagement on my social media. This kind of work related stress जो बैठे बैठे घर पे होता है.
Our body cannot differentiate the stress between a lion chasing us to death or my maid not coming to work tomorrow, right? It is about how we respond to that situation. If I am responding to my maid not coming to help me tomorrow morning as my life is going to be over, what am I going to do? For my body, it's going to release cortisol. उसके लिए तो वही stress है. From a biological standpoint, नहीं पता कि my maid not coming is not a lion chasing me. What is the stress response? Cortisol is going to get released. Why? Because I either need to fight or I need to flight, which means I need sugar pumping in my bloodstream so that I have the energy to like do what I need to do, which requires that excessive bout, right? Now, if it happens in small bursts, even if it's, let's say, social media stress or actually a lion chasing me, it's fine. It's going to happen for 10 minutes. I'm going to calm, or 15, 20, whatever minutes. I'm going to calm down. I'm going to become healed. The cortisol levels will come down. The body will realize, okay, now I'm safe. I can start digesting again. I can start recovering again. So this was acute stress, but it was not chronic. It happened really, really sort of, it kind of peaked. And then I could manage it. It came back to normal and it's fine. I and my husband fight a lot. Okay, I love you. But so when we do, as friends do, right? I mean, he's also my best friend. So when we do, you think our cortisol levels are not rising? I mean, we both want to kill each other, right? So we are at it and cortisol levels are peaking. But then 10 minutes in, we'll start laughing and then, we don't even remember what we are fighting about. That acute stress happened. It was literally like a lion chasing. He'll definitely say it's a lioness chasing. Then it came down. We're all normal. We're laughing and everything is fine. The problem happens when we don't know how to manage the stress. So if there is a work stressor, if let's say somebody is working with colleagues that are treating the person badly, or somebody's getting bullied, or somebody's in a relationship that is causing not this peak fight, but actual, feeling of abandonment or unhappiness or the kind of stress they can't deal with. Let's say even worse, they can't fight with their partner and they're not able to communicate. Now, what happens with that stress? It's consistently there because they're not able to address it. They're not able to manage it, right? So now the cortisol is remaining peaked consistently. This is chronic stress. So when we are not able to manage stress is chronic stress because your adrenal gland is constantly releasing cortisol. Your body is consistently in a very peak active mode and it's not able to put resources for digestion, recovery, repair, restoration, and you're not able to calm down to sleep properly. So chronic stress is the problem. Acute stress is not. The reason what I also want to highlight is workout is a stress. When you're going and lifting weights, a lot of people tell me, oh, inflammation rises. Of course it rises, right? You're supposed to get an inflammatory response. If you don't, you've gone and broken your muscle. If your body doesn't inflame, then there's a problem. So, but that stress is hormesis. What is happening is controlled. You're not working out 24/7. You're working out for that 1 hour. You've put the body through that much stress. Now the body realizes, itna pressure mere, let's say, bicep pe aa raha hai. This muscle has broken. Now I need to build the muscle to be stronger than the pressure that it had got. So it regenerates, repairs, creates a better, thicker, more mitochondria dense muscle. So what has it done? It's adapted to that stress. Brain works the same way. That is why when you're doing something that's difficult for you, if you're learning a new subject, you know how you get really brain tired? That's when your brain is going to grow. So when your brain hits that plateau where like your muscle hit the plateau of saying, okay, now I can't do anymore, and you push it further a little bit, you're actually growing your brain. So stress is good if it's controlled. Now you don't know how to control it or manage it and it continues, that's when it becomes chronic. And to come to your question for the long-winded answer, when we are dealing with chronic stress, we have now enough data to show that it actually turns on inflammation in the body. Right? And even if it's emotional stress. So that means, and that's why I say this very often because obviously relationships are important. We are social beings. That we must choose our partners and our friends very carefully because it's shown, negative, stressful emotions, consistent, tend to push the body epigenomically in an inflammatory mode. And then you end up with autoimmune diseases, you end up with inflammatory diseases, accelerated aging, losing your muscle and your bone density because you don't have the capacity to do anything else. So 100%. So in direct answer, yes, chronic stress changes your epigenomic signaling.
How about this? I think I'm a chronic overthinker, and I think it got passed on from my father. Does this happen from generation? It get passed on the kind of stress.
Absolutely. Again, it's the bookmark that your father, just before he conceived you, Where the bookmark was, you've got the bookmark there, you can change it. It's epigenomic. It's not a genetic blueprint, it's epigenomic. It's the bookmark. Remove it, put it somewhere else. How do you do that? Consistently train your body to behave a different way.
Getting a good sleep is a challenge nowadays, right?
Definitely, yes.
Especially in today's world when there's phone and social media and all, and your brain is continuously working and taking this kind of stress and all.
Right.
So how do you build a routine, or what is your idea or a routine?
What's your personal routine?
Or
you'd like to know?
your hack of getting a good sleep?
I think the first thing we need to understand that sleep, good night's sleep doesn't start at night. It starts in the morning. So what you do as soon as you wake up is going to define how well your body is primed to be able to wind down at night. Not to say night doesn't matter, but it begins in the morning. And I'll club this with my routine. So as soon as I wake up, the first thing, and I make every single person who works with me, irrespective of what imbalance they come with, do this. Within the first 30 minutes, go outside and get sunlight. If you have the opportunity of walking barefoot, even better on actual ground. Otherwise, go outside and get sunlight. Why? Because our eyes can decipher the sun rays to be able to recognize it's morning. And it clears adenosine buildup, which is what coffee does, and that's why it makes us feel awake. The sunlight or bright light does it much better than coffee. Morning, our cortisol is supposed to peak. That's the natural rhythm. It should. When it doesn't peak, or for people it doesn't peak, is because they're under adrenal fatigue. Right? So you want to let the cortisol peak without interfering with caffeine in the morning, which means the coffee should get delayed by at least hour and a half after waking up. Unless, of course, people who are going in for a workout immediately will compensate by using it as a pre-workout. That's a different story. So number one, getting morning sunlight as soon as you wake up. Number two, making sure that we are hydrating and really starting the digestive system. Right? And when I say hydration, normally people only think water. But we're also, when we're dehydrated, the body is not just missing water, it's also missing electrolytes. So electrolytes have become very popular, and I'm glad that they've become very popular because we do require sodium, potassium, magnesium for the system to work. I like to call ourselves walking, talking chemical labs. The chemical reactions that's happening inside, right? You know, all of us have done some chemistry in school at least. So you know that in the chemistry lab, you are putting multiple chemicals together, and then there are accelerators, and then there are, you know, catalysts, and then they're whatever they're called, the ones that block the chemical reaction. Same thing is happening in the system. So all the nutrients we talk about are nothing but components that are going to get used inside for various chemical reactions or pathways. So electrolyte hydration is super important. Then ideally, workout.
So are you suggesting to have this electrolyte water in the morning?
I also work out in the morning, but what I do is just take a little bit of Himalayan salt, put it in a liter of water, and I have that liter of water. So I don't use a market electrolyte just yet. Then I go in for my workout, then I have the electrolyte water.
Yeah, but then how do you get sleep doing all of this?
Okay, so what has now happened is you've primed the morning catecholamine synthesis, or the wake up and let's feel happy about the world, let's get things done. Those neurotransmitters or brain chemicals, you've peaked in the morning, which is how they're supposed to peak. When this peaks in the morning, your body is working on a clock. Whether we like to or not, we like to think ourselves as free spirits, like we're not living on a clock, but the body is living on a clock. When you've peaked this in the morning, now the body has established, okay, this is my peak time, which means X hours later, I need to start winding down and have my rest and recovery time. So you have to peak this to be able to support the balance of the wind down. That's why this is important. Then second, of course, you live your day, etc., etc. A big mistake I see people making is having coffee very close to bed. And when I say close to bed, ideally, biochemically. And I love when people argue saying, I can have a cup of coffee and go to sleep, mujhe farak nahi padta. I'll come to that argument in a bit because I like talking about it. But 10 hours before bed should be your last coffee.
10 hours?
और ये matlab the closest to bed hai. Ideally, it should be 12. Maybe even more, but 10, usko 8 kar lo maximum. But I see people having it like 4 hours. I see people having coffee at 8 p.m.
Peak in the start.
Right.
So by the time you end the day, it should be winding down.
Right.
I'll give you my example. So for me, my workouts are programmed somewhere in the middle of the afternoon. So my peak stage comes somewhat there.
Even if you're working out in the afternoon, that's not your peak state. Your neurotransmitters or your brain chemicals should still peak in the morning. Afternoon workout is not a bad thing. It's almost like compensating for the afternoon slump. So you're physically, yes, you're straining yourself, you're giving yourself stress. And if your goal, by the way, is strength and sort of muscle building, afternoon is the best time to work out.
What about working out at, suppose in the late evening or early evening, say
3 hours before the sleep.
So is it going to affect your sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, if a lion comes to chase you just before bed, then you're not going to be able to wind down and go to sleep. If there's a choice of working out in the evening or not working out at all, please work out. And then I'll tell you what you can do to help yourself calm down, but don't skip the workout. Or at least for people who just have to have that schedule, do it. But ideally, obviously, it's going to interfere with sleep.
Okay, you have said things that is like going to set the rhythm right for good sleep. But what is not to do before sleep?
If you have to start, if you're somebody who has coffee in the evening, then start with an 8-hour mark. That's more doable, right? So start with an 8-hour mark at least. And even then, if you can do a half calf, nowadays we get a half calf also. So that's a good thing to do. Second, the 2 to 3 hours before your bedtime is the most important. Number one thing, what you want to do is reduce light exposure. So how we have a lot of bright lights in the house. So dim them down. Ideally have more orangish, yellow, reddish lights on. You know how in our ancestral time we used to have candlelight in the night. That's perfect. It doesn't ruin your sleep rhythm. Because low light. Because see what, like in the morning, light is peaking your morning neurotransmitters, right? So you know that light works against everything that you need in the night. So your melatonin is very sensitive to light, by the way. So in the evening, first build down or kind of, dim down the lights. Second, we've all heard about blue light blockers because we know blue light interferes with sleep. So I'm not saying don't watch your televisions or don't watch your laptops. Just have the night light. All our laptops now have the night light on, or wear a blue light blocker so that at least your eyes are saved from bright white blue light. That's the second. The third is just create an environment that allows your system to move into what we call parasympathetic mode. So the central nervous system I spoke about, right? Sympathetic is the fight or flight. Let's go and rule the world or run from a tiger. The second is the parasympathetic, where you are ready to recover, rest, digest. How do you do that? Having nice conversations with people you love, just kind of simmering down, not watching content that's going to get you worked up. So, nowadays most of the content is either political or I don't know what, all the debates under the world, irrespective of what your belief system is. I think the content is just rage baiting consistently. So we're all always angry. We are having these real, serious conversations about our belief really wanting to change the world. That should not be happening in the evening. Do that in the morning if you must. So I think just choosing the kind of content to watch. So this is actually a conversation I have with my partner a lot, right? My husband watches some really serious content. Even if he's watching entertainment, it's serious content. And we both literally are watching 2 different sets. And I'm like, you wear your headsets, I'll wear mine, because I get super worked up. I want to watch light comedies where I'm not using my brain. That works, right? Because you're allowing your system to shut down and really just calm down, recover, focus on what needs to be done. And then lastly, eat your dinner at least 3 hours before bed. Minimal. You don't want to be digesting when you're sleeping, because insulin is the opposite of growth hormone, and growth hormone peaks when you sleep.
Okay. I want you to either make some things fact or they are completely myth. I got programmed that having coffee in an empty stomach, which I actually like, is not good for health, and for some reason I stopped doing it. So if it suits as somebody who is into biohacking, what you suggest? Can having coffee in an empty stomach is good? Not good?
It's nuanced, this question, but having coffee, as long as there is some sort of buffer, like maybe ghee or coconut oil or coconut milk in it, first thing in the morning is fine. But you're just putting a little bit of buffer so that it's good for your gut lining. Now, I know where this theory comes from. It comes from 2 places why they say don't have coffee first thing in the morning. A lot of people, as soon as they wake up, have coffee. Right? You want to give it a little bit of time because you want the cortisol to peak naturally. Second, if you are going to go work out, it's a different story. Second, your gut lining. See, coffee can be a little bit acidic, right? It can be slightly harsh for your gut. So you want to line your gut first or with the coffee, then coffee is perfectly fine.
When you say first thing in the morning, is the warm water with the electrolytes will be counted as the first thing, or
Yeah,
after that a
absolutely.
coffee is having?
Absolutely. I'll tell you my morning rhythm. So I have my water with the Himalayan salt. That's first thing in the morning. After which I have my coffee with ghee. So technically my coffee is, for all means and purposes, the first thing I'm having, but I put ghee in it.
But someone with like acidity problem, like I have acidity problem, I cannot consume coffee without
Absolutely.
eating at least something.
Absolutely. So now this is where bioindividuality
Biohacking,
comes into
yeah,
place,
right.
right? Because somebody, and I'm also going to digress a little and say, you know how we hear things like kombucha is the best for your gut health and kimchi is so fabulous. It is when everything is healthy. That's why I hate absolutes. So when it comes to bioindividuality, biohacking, longevity, you understand that there is no one absolute rule. You have to understand what's happening with your system at this point in time. If you have acidity, that means your stomach acid creation, your gut lining is already compromised. Now what you want to do is focus on healing your gut lining. Once the gut lining is healed, you might be able to manage coffee again. So my suggestion for somebody like that would be, anyway, don't have black coffee. Ideally reduce your coffee intake anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, one follow-up question. When it comes to sleep, is sleeping on the same time is important, or sleeping at fixed time, that is 10 or 11, that's like closer to the sunset, that should be the time, and waking up at 4 5, that is important?
How many hours of minimum sleep requirement is there? Like I've heard that if you don't sleep at least 7 hours, your brain starts like something starts eating your brain or something of that sort. Like scientifically I can't explain, but yeah,
I understand
you
what
got
you're
it what I
saying.
mean.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, answering this question first, what is more important is sleeping at the same time every day. The reason being because our bodies work on a clock. So your body is going to get used to you sleeping at a certain time. And why is that important? Because the this is how it should work for somebody who's healthy. The deep sleep begins that early window when you've just slept, right? Those first 2 hours, you're going to get that deep sleep bout where your body actually cleans your brain. You literally have a liquid coming from your spine cleaning your brain. So you want your body to know when that 2 hours is happening consistently. So for somebody, and I have a lot of people who work different shifts because they're working with companies in different countries. Actually just yesterday I was talking to somebody. They sleep at 5 in the morning. That's just their life. Now they are, for all means and purposes, this person is a shift worker. Now I can't tell this person leave your job and look for a different. This is what it is. So what I tell this person is, if you're sleeping at 5, you're sleeping at 5 every day. Not that one day I'm trying to sleep at 3, the other day I sleep at 5, the other day I'm pushing it further and sleeping at 7. Then 5 is every day. Of course, you make it conducive, you black out the windows. Those are different stories. So what is more important is consistency. What is ideal is 10, 11 consistently. But everybody cannot live the ideal timeline.
So both of us till 2024 slept every day at 5 in the morning, because I used to do night shift, US shifts. So 5 o'clock sharp I'll get sleep, and by the time 12:30 or 1 o'clock we used to wake up. But there was always this thing in my mind that circadian rhythm, we are going against the biological clock. So people who are doing shift works, let's say they're sleeping on time and they are getting this 7 or 8 hours of good sleep. Now, how the circadian rhythm, when it comes to biohacking, comes into the picture? Are they still need to change it, or if they are clocking right amount of sleep at right time, will that be still helpful?
It's a very important and nuanced question, because it is important that they sleep at the right time and they get their 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep every night. But is it the best thing for the biology? No. Again, I say this, that in health and in biohacking or longevity science, we should take a 80-20 rule. We don't live in the kind of times where 100% everything can be perfect, right? It just can't. So what we want to do is understand what our life cycle, work cycle, etc. allows, and then do the best thing for that. So again, I can't tell somebody just because your work culture or your work timing doesn't allow it, the person can't just leave the job and do something different, or tell a client or XYZ that I'm not available. Then you make the best of it and say, I'm going to focus on consistency. I'm going to focus on quality of sleep. So if it's 5 a.m., it's 5 a.m. Make sure that the basic sleep hygiene, that means completely dark room, cold room, noise-free room, is something you're able to create. Right? And I tell people, put like black chart papers on the window behind your curtains. Put earplugs on, because kitna bhi you try, there'll be some, because everybody else is waking up in the morning, right? Yes, you are working against the natural circadian rhythm, obviously. In my experience working with shift workers, I think the biggest problem I have seen with this is not to do with sleep physiology. It is emotional connection, emotional social connection. Because see, when they are sleeping, the world is awake and doing what they're doing. By the time they are at work, everybody is socializing. Then when they're out of work, the whole world is sleeping. So the missing of the social emotional connection is what hampers their biology way more than sleep physiology. So keeping that aside, sleep-wise, consistency is more important. To answer your question, minimal baseline for majority of the people. I know some people argue I do well with 4 hours. There is a gene mutation which a very, very maybe 0.51% of people will have. For majority people, 7.5 is baseline. Ideally, somewhere between 7.5 to 9. Women do need more sleep.
In your experience, what you have saw, what are the habits that are silently damaging brain health or damaging cognitive health today?
I'm glad you asked this. First, very, very, very high glucose load in our diet. Right? I want to highlight this because I don't think I say this enough or it gets said enough. Now researchers are recognizing Alzheimer's as a type 3 diabetes. I mean, they're kind of calling type 3 diabetes, right? Glucose intake, glucose load in the diet plays a huge role in cognitive decline. One habit I see really hampering our health from every perspective: cardiometabolic load, neuro or your cognitive load. So number one is that. Number two is not building enough muscle. Majority of Indians, like you guys spoke about 10,000 steps, majority of Indians, specifically parents, right? I see them either only doing morning walks, maybe thoda yoga. That's not workout. They're not building the most important organ, which is muscle. Muscle is a brain organ also, right? And I called it a metabolic organ. It's also a mitochondrial organ. It's a longevity organ because every time you're contracting your muscle, it releases the chemicals that are talking to your brain. It increases your brain's mitochondrial efficiency, right? The tissue that generates or consumes the most energy has the maximum mitochondria. That's just the way the body works, right? That's why brain has a lot of mitochondria, heart has a lot of mitochondria, muscle has a lot of mitochondria. When you're improving or increasing energy demand on the body improves mitochondrial efficiency and density. When you increase muscle, it also tells the brain to improve its mitochondrial efficiency. So that's the second big one. And I'm not saying I want everybody to become a bodybuilder. Just engage the muscles, right? Give enough of resistance so that the bones are growing, because our bones are living organs. Muscles, of course, are living organs. That's the second. Third is the chronic stress, which is sometimes not even recognized, right? It is silly things which are not managed. It's not that something big is happening. Well, of course, sometimes something big is happening in life. I'm not, discounting that. But sometimes it isn't. It's just that we've not recognized that we need tools to manage stress and pay attention to sleep. So these are the 4 things that are very, very, very common, unfortunately.
Okay. Brain fog is very casually used. This term is like very normalized and casually used these days because younger people are getting this brain fog. So why do you think it's happening and how do we manage that?
I love you asked this question. Exactly what I said, right? If you look at our diet, and there is a Lancet ICMR study which was done, longitudinal study, to figure out what is the Indian diet looking like. Right? And now this is not individual researchers like me. This is the Lancet ICMR study. Now they also figured what we've been saying for the longest time, that the problem with the Indian diet is that it is extremely carb heavy. Right? I add a different angle to it. Not only is it extremely carb heavy, it's extremely chronically protein deficient. I was talking about the data I released, the report I released on the observational data of 43 women. 70% of them are chronically under-proteined and under-muscled. Now, why am I highlighting protein? Because when we are talking about brain fog, glucose load we spoke about, Alzheimer's is known as a type 3 diabetes. So glucose is reducing or impacting your cognitive load. Not only muscle is important for your mitochondrial health or your brain health, amino acids. Now, see what happens in our body. When we eat carbs, it converts into glucose. When we eat fat, it converts into lipids. When we eat protein, it converts into amino acids. Unfortunately, because of the gym culture, we have only associated protein with muscle with gym. That's not how it is. Everything in our body, every single thing, our hormones, our neurotransmitters, our cell walls, our organ walls, our, I don't know what else can I think about, our DNA repair, muscles, of course, and skin, everything is made of amino acids. To the extent, I'm going to use another case report. 47-year-old comes to me with Hashimoto's hypothyroid, right? It's an autoimmune hypothyroid disease. The doctors asked her to go on Thyronorm, typically what's done. And she was obviously really scared. And she said, can we do something? I said, don't go on Thyronorm. Give me 4 weeks. 4 weeks in, thyroid started coming down. 8 weeks, completely normal. You know what I did? Increased her protein intake. We don't realize the hormone the enzyme that converts T4 to T3. T4 is inactive thyroid that your gland creates. T3 is the active thyroid. Also requires amino acids. That enzyme requires, so if you're not giving the body the raw material that is required to do what the chemical reactions are meant to do, how will the body work?
Okay, so I am 45 to 46 kg. As a woman, how much protein do I need? And what if I don't want to take like artificial, like not, I wouldn't call artificial supplement protein, like whether it's plant or...
So I'm going to ask you why not supplement? Because okay, let me answer your first question first. So ideally, a man will do great with a 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kg ideal body weight. Women till about 35, similar. Above 35, I bump it up to 2 grams per kg ideal body weight for a woman. For a man also ideally, but women absolutely. Why? Because ovarian output, which is your estrogen and progesterone, start to decline. Right? Obviously, basic transition. As of now, from a longevity science, we've not found a reversible or a treatment for menopause. We all are going to get menopause.
Yeah, and we have been doing a lot of podcasts with gynecologists, so by now we know that
menopause is
yeah,
absolutely. So ovarian. So, and when I say ovarian decline, even as young as 35, progesterone starts to decline. Right? Estrogen is becoming volatile, and my God, there's amazing data of what I see happening there, but I'll not get into that. So with this happening, what is also going on with the body, estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone, right? We only think about estrogen, progesterone from a reproduction cycle. Estrogen plays a role in your muscle protein synthesis, in your bone making process, the osteoblast process, in your metabolic pathways. Now estrogen has suddenly become volatile and your body can't rely on ovaries. This sort of support system is taken away. So it's nothing to do with reproduction. Your muscle protein synthesis declines, your bone osteoblast processes decline, your metabolic pathways start to decline. That is why you see insulin resistance is setting in much, much quicker. More importantly, we become anabolic resistant. That means our body's capacity to respond to muscle protein synthesis, to the amount of workout that we do, to the amount of protein that we have becomes lesser. So the protein intake requirement actually becomes more also because your hormone synthesis require protein. So for women above 35, I trended slightly closer to 2 grams per kg ideal body weight, not your current body weight, because that of course can be different for different people. Coming to the second point, we are largely a vegetarian country, right? Largely, I mean, more or less. Even if we aren't, we are not as heavy when it comes to meat eating or animal product eating as the Western countries. So the narrative that is going on in the Western countries where they talk about, okay, we largely have enough protein from food, we should talk more about other things, is not true for us. We are chronically underproteined. It is next to impossible for us to get enough protein from a normal diet without increasing the amount of carbs that we are eating and also ruining our gut health. It's next to impossible. How much food are we possibly going to eat to be able to get 2 grams? I'll give you my example. I do 130 grams of protein every single day. How much food will I have to eat to get 130 grams of protein? And I have a rather sensitive gut. You have to rely on supplementation. The only piece that I say, You can choose what supplementation works for you. Of course, plant, there's also yeast, there's whey. There's also nuances there, depends on what's going on with your system bio-individuality. But the only thing I'll say is, obviously it should be clean, it should be as natural as possible, in the sense what you want to stay away from is the additives, is the fillers, is the flavors, is the things on the label that you cannot pronounce. You want to stay away from that. But the absolute whey or the absolute aminos extracted from whatever ingredient that you're having from is got nothing to do with it being fake or synthetic. Your body needs amino acids.
So you're saying, like, if somebody can incorporate right amount of protein at the right age, keeping the body weight in mind, especially in women, the menopause period will become easier?
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because at no point, and somebody very recently asked me this, can I delay menopause? We don't, from a science standpoint, absolutely have any way of supporting the body regenerate ovarian reserve. We're all born as women with a set amount of eggs, right? So what we do with these changes, and I'm going to say a couple of pieces. One, having enough protein. Second, really lifting heavy. For women to build muscle, it takes a lot of persistence. Right? Men obviously have more testosterone, they have more anabolic response. So, women get scared of becoming bulky by lifting heavy. We're not going to become bulky. What's going to happen is our growth hormone response improves. Growth hormone for us is very different. It's the same growth hormone. It does a lot of different things as compared to men. For men, growth hormone, yes, has an anabolic response, right? So they'll build better muscle. For us, it increases metabolic flexibility. That means our body's ability to utilize energy, to utilize glucose improves when we have better growth hormone, which comes from either really heavy strength training, very, very good sleep, or heat exposure to some extent. So for women, I say having enough protein, lifting heavy weights, and sleeping well are the three best things you can do to make that transition smoother, and to ensure that everything we've heard of, the osteoporosis setting in, or us losing our bone health as menopause hits, losing our mobility as we go through menopause, and even losing our libido. A lot of women are worried about losing their sexuality as they get menopaused. None of it happens if you're giving the body the support system to be able to go through the transition with the reserves.
Does the epigenomics things comes in play here, that you're basically suppressing that what's supposed to happen, but giving the right thing to the body?
So I'll honestly tell you, it's not supposed to happen. It's happening because we didn't recognize what this transition is asking for. So this is actually not even supposed to happen. If we had, see, what am I asking you to do? Literally just give the body the resources that, if you think about us as animals, we probably were. What were we eating as animals? We were eating other animals and some patta and fruits, right? And we were consistently hunting or running or saving ourselves. So we were moving our body consistently. Well, of course, lifespans were different then. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, after reproduction, we anyway were not required. But it's different now. So it's not that we are telling the body not to do what it's supposed to do. We are giving the body the resources to do what it's meant to do, to survive. So I actually also like to talk about weightlifting from this standpoint. What are you doing? You are putting an energy demand on your system to tell your system, hey, I am still alive, I still want to live, I still want to become healthy, right? I'm creating a demand, so you live up to it. So you've got to step up and give me more energy.
Okay, let's talk about inflammation. Why are autoimmune diseases and chronic inflammation are increasing so dramatically across during this time?
I love that you guys ask very, very good questions. So let's break this a little bit. Because while there is a sort of correlation, I want to address both separately. We'll talk about autoimmune first. A large portion of autoimmune activation that I see, and now I'm talking about not people who are born with genetic-driven autoimmune conditions, which obviously aren't the kind of lifestyle pieces that we are seeing. I'm assuming we're talking about things like Hashimoto's, thyroid, or arthritis, rheumatoid, which are triggered as we. Now, what is happening? One of the biggest drivers that I see is either gut health, because, and I'll explain this a little bit, our gut lining is supposed to be like a mesh, right? So everything that's going inside, our gut is actually an external world. It's not the internal world, because there's so much from the outside that goes in, right? We are almost constantly eating. Now, it has the ability to keep everything inside, but through this mesh, only the nutrients that are allowed to go. Now, the kind of foods that we are eating, even stress, and a lot of the medicines that we eat, the antacids that I was talking about, it starts to loosen the tight junctions. So, the gut lining, you've heard the word leaky gut? Yes. The gut lining becomes leaky. Now, what is happening? A lot of toxins, a lot of food particles which shouldn't have entered the system are entering the system. What this does is it's triggering your immune system to respond. So, anybody who has the genetic blueprint, which was not turned on for an autoimmune disease, is now going to get turned on because your immune system is responding to some foreign bodies that it does not know how to deal with. That's number one. Number two, in a lot of cases, the reason why, if anybody's heard me talking about this, I talk about eradicating gluten when it comes to autoimmune diseases, especially thyroid, is because there's something known as molecular mimicry. So when the protein in gluten is very similar to your thyroid gland's makeup. So the antibodies that are trying to attack this gluten protein that has entered the system where it shouldn't have entered also starts to attack your thyroid gland. So this is just a molecular mimicry driven autoimmune hypothyroidism. Right? So number one root cause that I see, at least in my practice, is leaky gut or gut related LPS load increase, which also is causing inflammation. Because what is happening? Your immune system, so like let's talk about this, right? I've done a cupping therapy. Now, this mark that you see here and the swelling that has happened is what? It's acute inflammation. Because I've literally caused hurt on a particular portion, because of which my body has responded by sending its immune cells here to heal it, because of which there is a local inflammation that has happened. Right now, if I test my inflammation markers, they'll be high. But this is acute. It has happened because of a certain reason for a small period of time. The body is going to heal this will go away, this inflammation will go away, the mark will go away. Now, inside the system, when there is consistent LPS load or lipopolysaccharides because of the leaky gut, the body is constantly immune active, right? It's constantly fighting something. And when it's constantly fighting something, the immune response is going to cause inflammation. Inflammation in itself is not bad. Inflammation is your body's response to something going wrong. When it is consistently on, what you should ask is, why is my body consistently responding to something? Right? And that's why I always say more than HSCRP, which is acute inflammation, I also like to look at ESR, which is chronic inflammation. For a lot of people, HSCRP will be quite okayish. ESR is super high because there is something low grade. There is no one bacteria or viral infection that the body is responding to. There is a low grade gut driven pathogen overload. That means your gut microbiome has some sort of a bacteria or virus which is overgrowing. Bacteria, virus, all are required in a gut microbiome, but some is overgrowing, which is causing this dysbiosis, or there is a leaky gut that is releasing things in the system that the system is responding to. That's the first reason, the first root cause. The second one, which has also become very common, specifically for rheumatoid arthritis, which we see, is the environmental pollution. We don't recognize, and when we're talking about air pollution or even water pollution, we don't recognize that what is happening is when this is entering our system, whether we're breathing it in or we're drinking it, these are toxins, right? What is your body going to do with toxins? Your body has to eradicate it. Now, if the toxins coming in your system is more and more frequent than your body's antioxidant or detox capacity, toxins are going to build up. The body has to respond to this. Right? For the body, this is a foreign object. This is something that either is harming the body, reacting to something else, blocking some other chemical reaction. All of these possibilities are going to cause an immune response or going to cause inflammation.
So you are saying like our modern lifestyles and over sanitization is basically damaging our microbiome?
Absolutely. In fact, something I recently see again with parents, right? Parents are so scared of young children, of the children playing with animals or playing in the mud. All of us grew up in, playing in really muddy, at least my generation did grow, playing in muddy parks, and I've always grown up surrounded by dogs. And that has strengthened our immune system and our gut microbiome. We need to get exposed to natural bacteria, viruses to be strong so that our immune system and our gut microbiome is strong. But what we're getting exposed to is chemicals and toxin load, endocrine disruptors via plastic and all of the pollutants, but being protected from nature, which is trees, plants, animals.
I want to understand the Alzheimer's and the neurodegeneration. Like, does it starts like decades ago and before any symptoms appear? And can lifestyle actually reduce that kind of risk?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lovely saying, I don't remember who said it, so I'm just going to paraphrase this individual. They said that the Alzheimer's that happens in 80s started in the 30s. The diabetes that happened in the 50s started in the 20s. You know, the immobility or our ability to not get up from bed that happens in the 70s actually also started in the 30s. Everything, and that is the reason why I was talking about when we spoke about markers, test your fasting insulin rather than waiting for the glucose to rise, test your homocysteine rather than waiting for a cardiovascular or neurodegenerative issue to come up, because every imbalance exists for decades before it manifests into a disease. We are waiting for symptoms to happen. Symptoms is your body's way of saying something is broken. But before it breaks, it's like a piece of furniture, right? There's going to be a little bit of a wobbliness or a crack before it actually collapses. That's exactly what's happening in the system.
So, what are the early signs of neurodegeneration? And also explain, like, when we talk about neurodegeneration, what exactly it means.
Okay, signs can really, really vary. I think what to look for is always get your markers tested. Even inflammation is a sign of neurodegeneration, right? Even, like I said, having metabolic dysfunction. By the way, we are the capital of not just diabetes, but also metabolic syndrome, which is what happens way before diabetes, right? Insulin resistance, we spoke about how Alzheimer's is closely related to glucose intake. So all of these are symptoms of neurodegeneration. It's not just brain fog or starting to forget things. Those are symptoms that have now started showing. These are signs that have happened much, much earlier. What is neurodegeneration? Literally like muscle degeneration. Think about it. You can understand that if I had muscle here in my 20s and now I don't. You know how a lot of people say, oh, mere leg ke muscles khatam ho gaye hain. Same thing is happening in the brain. Your brain has the capacity to consistently grow and become stronger. When you stop, one, giving it the resources. Second, you're stressing it out. Third, you're not giving it exercise. Your brain thinks, okay, this is a part I don't need to use, so it starts shrinking there.
In the case of Alzheimer's, also lifestyle choices, food like bad food and stress can contribute to this disease.
Absolutely. I said three things. You know, I very recently actually put out a reel on this because a lot of people, people who work with me get genetic testing done. A lot of people have the genetic positive testing for Alzheimer's and they get really scared, right? Including myself, I think. So this is where I talk about genetics and epigenetics, that just because you have the genetic report saying that you have a possibility of getting it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It means there is a gene variant that can make this happen. Now, epigenomic levers you design so it never gets turned on. So what do? And I'm saying the opposite, right? So instead of what you're doing that's causing it, what should you do that it doesn't happen? Increase your protein intake, reduce your glucose load. Start lifting weights. Your muscle is going to release the myokines that is going to improve brain health. Third, do your lot of, like you're working out your muscle, work out your brain. Do things that challenge your brain. Give your brain a reason to regrow or strengthen itself. Right? You know, a lot of people, it's an anecdotal saying, but it's true. I do Sudoku every day. That's why my brain is so sharp. It is. You're making your brain work hard. You're exercising your brain, right? You're not passively consuming content. So that's the third. And the fourth, of course, sleep, right? Because you know how we spoke about the brain regenerates. Your body, your brain literally recreates, or it's almost like a puzzle. It puts things in place when you're sleeping. You're constantly consuming information. Not just what we are doing consciously, like, we are having this conversation right now. I'm consciously talking and listening to both of you. But everything that's happening around, all of our brains, it is absorbing it, right? Some things knowingly, some things even unknowingly. God forbid if there is a noise that happens outside right now, we will know it. We will respond to it. So your brain is always, it's wired to keep us alive for survival. It's constantly taking information in. Give it the time and the resources to regenerate.
Where do you rate dark chocolate and alcohol for brain damage and brain health?
Super. Dark chocolate, 100 for brain health. Alcohol, minus 100 for brain damage. Alcohol is, it literally, yes, short term, but of course people have chronic, they kind of have it for an extended period of time. Not only does it literally impair or stop brain regeneration and actually to a large extent, when you're having even a little bit, it impacts your brain health by degrading it immediately for almost 72-ish hours. It also stops or slows down muscle protein synthesis.
I sleep for 8 hours. I consume a lot of nutrient-rich diet. I am very particular with my body movement. I only drink on weekends 6 pegs or maybe 3 pegs or 4 pegs.
I thought he's going to say 1 peg. I was like, हाँ चल ठीक है.
So if somebody is saying that, over a weekend, I just treat my body like an amusement park, but rest 5 days, I treat it like a temple. Is it gonna take away me from my biohacking journey?
In your 20s, you'll get away with it. In your 20s, you'll get away with it. So maybe if you've really taken care of yourself, you might not feel a lot in the 30s, but eventually it's going to catch up, because what will happen? Your liver will start showing it, your brain or your cognitive health will start showing it. That's where it'll start. Because it's a toxin, right? Your liver has to work hard to detoxify. And that's what I see. I see a lot of people like that, by the way, who do everything perfectly, and then they're like, okay, six to abhi, I think I have not seen anybody, but 3-4.
Weekend is like people use binge drinking for the weekend. वो एक दिन में बस 5 दिन में नहीं पीता हूँ उसके लिए.
And then you'll start seeing it purely. जहाँ तक मेरा experience है, liver markers सबसे पहले दिखाते हैं, सबसे पहले. And then दूसरा also your muscles stop responding, right? Because you're working out, but muscle protein synthesis starts to decline. And third, see, brain is going to take a while for us to notice, because brain symptoms unfortunately only get caught when we've actually caused all the harm. Pehle it's showing you in all of the other organs and the inflammatory markers which we are ignoring. And then the gut. The gut is actually, let me rephrase that. The gut is going to get compromised first, because that goes unnoticed. Liver markers dikh jate hain.
So since you're talking about gut, we call gut our second brain.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is. See, gut and brain are constantly talking to each other. They're genuinely talking to each other, right? And the gut microbiome play a huge role in keeping us alive, because it synthesizes a lot of the vitamins, minerals, and neurotransmitters or brain chemicals. So a lot of stuff is actually happening in your gut that is not only keeping you alive, but sending the brain the signals to know कैसे respond करना है body को. That's why it's the second brain. And the gut feeling is actually a gut feeling. It literally is your second brain telling you something.
So, like, in order to take care of our brain, we have to take care of our gut first.
I think in order to take care of anything when it comes to health, we should take care of our gut first.
What kind of biomarkers should we go for, or the basic tests that you suggest one should go for to be in this biohacking journey for oneself?
So I actually have released something called the biology dashboard, because I want people to have access of what are the basic markers, not just the markers you should be testing, but also what is the ranges you should be looking at. Because in the blood report, the range that they use, that's called reference ranges, right? That's looking for a state of disease. What we use when it comes from a functional medicine lens, it's called optimal ranges, because we're looking for a state of imbalance. So for example, a fasting insulin of 11 or let's say 7 in a normal blood report will come as normal. But if you look at it from a biohacking functional medicine lens, 7 for me is proper insulin resistance. So I've publicly released this biology dashboard, which has all of the markers I spoke about, which is your hsCRP, your fasting insulin, your ApoB, homocysteine, vitamin D, the hormones that we should be looking at, and what is the optimal ranges. If it's not in the optimal range, you know something needs to be fixed before a disease happens, before a symptom comes. Even for gut health, if your inflammation is up, if there is infection in your CBC panel, you know that gut mein something is going on. Of course, then you correlate with symptoms. That's the number one. That's again, like if I make a pyramid again with this, that's the number one test I tell people that you should absolutely get. I do it every 3 months. For somebody who's serious about biohacking, I say do it twice a year. For somebody who wants to just take care of precautionary preventive health, do it at least once a year.
And the basic blood test markers.
Basic blood test markers, just that most of the panels that we do misses these couple of markers. Like you'll not see fasting insulin, ApoB, even hsCRP when you're doing thyroid, not total T3 and TSH, but ultra sensitive TSH, free T3, free T4. You'll see a lot of these markers are missing, but they are available in every lab. You just ask for the right markers, and I'm giving the optimal ranges, so I want people to look for a state of health, not look for a state of disease, right? This is number one. Then yes, if somebody wants to go a little bit deeper, if somebody struggling with gut health knows that yes, there is a gut health issue, can see that there is infection in the infection panel, or let's say there's some inflammation, then get a gut microbiome test. Even before a gut microbiome test, I love to do an organic acids test, which is going to give you a good, but that's difficult for an individual to decipher, so I don't put it in this list. That's only when you're working with somebody. So when I'm working with somebody, I like to look at the organic acid test because I can know what's going on with the mitochondrial health, what's going on with the nutrient or the vitamin absorption pathways, what's going on with your gut pathways. Sometimes some infection is not visible in the blood report or the gut microbiome, but I can see it in the organic acids. Right? So this is when you're working with somebody. Otherwise, individually, blood test, 100% number one. Number two, if you want to look at your gut microbiome test, and if you want to understand what is the blueprint that you're working with to be able to make epigenomic shifts, gene test. But I'll be very honest, I don't recommend people getting a gene test on their own because they just get scared. Everybody is going to have susceptibility to some disease. ऐसा कोई genetic test नहीं होगा जिसमें कोई भी बीमारी, you have no gene for any ailment. But those diseases are so serious, right? Because कोई cancer दिख जाएगा, कोई neurodegeneration disease दिख जाएगा, then people start to get really scared.
And stressed out more.
And really stressed out. Imagine you get your blood report and it says, you possibility of Alzheimer's very high, possibility of breast cancer very high, you'll get scared, right? So only when you're working with somebody, get it, who can explain it to you or really understand that just because the genetics is there doesn't mean it's going to happen. Otherwise, don't get the gene test.
In today's world, we are talking longevity quite often. Like, is it real, first of all?
Oh, absolutely.
Means age reversal is real.
It is, but I want to explain what that means. See, age reversal doesn't mean you're going to look like you're 20 years old when you're 70. I mean, you can, hopefully, but that's not the aim.
The biological age,
Age. So, what is longevity? I'll say from my lens, it's almost health span, right? What is it saying? That when you are 90, right, and ideally lifespan is already increasing, so that anyway the medical industry is taking care of. But when you're 90, do you want to be lying on the bed not able to do anything at all and relying on your family or nurses? Or do you want to be able to live your life and at least do the things that you love doing, or at least take care of yourself physically on your own? That difference is what the longevity science is solving for right now.
In West, we hear a lot of cases that people claim that their biological age is now 20, but they're 40.
I do the same thing. So I think I say that pretty loud that I just turned 40 and my biological age is 27.8. What that means is inside, at a cellular level, from my blood markers, from my epigenomic markers, my body is functioning like a normal data average of a 27, 28-year-old, while I've lived for 40 years on this earth.
So in order to practice longevity or age reversal, what are the things that you need to do?
Pyramid. I make it so, I say, there are so many things we can do, right? And I do, so I have a lot of people on social media asking me, what's your stack? What do you do? I said, Baba, I have got the pyramid in place first, right? And I have to keep going back to the pyramid while I'm doing advanced stuff. So don't talk to me about the advanced stack. If I tell you what I take as my supplement stack or what I do in my biohacking, there's no point. Because what will happen is you'll start copy pasting it, but your fundamentals are not going to be in place.
And might the supplement that is working for you, based on what parameters you need that supplement, you have included that, but that supplement won't work for the other person.
And honestly, when you start fixing the pyramid, you will really start understanding your body so well. With that, just start getting your blood work done. And you will genuinely, trust me, and I can bet on this, right? You will start to see how it changes your markers. You'll see inflammation response, you'll see gut health response, you'll see a hormonal health response. And then you also start getting a sense of what your body is responding to. And then, of course, to go deeper and really get into sort of, creating a supplement stack, people ask me what's the best longevity supplement. The best longevity supplement is what works for your body at that point. So for anybody starting out and saying, hey, listen, I want to go down the biohacking path, I say you have to start with this pyramid. Sleep. First step, make sure you're getting 7.5 to 9 hours of good sleep, consistent time every single day, able to fall asleep on time fast without any supplemental help. You should take supplements and that's perfectly fine, like a glycine or a magnesium glycinate is fabulous, but without sleep support. And waking up feeling healthy, slept, rested, energetic. Then second, work on your nutrition, make sure you're getting enough protein for your body, make sure your glucose load is in order and you're getting the healthy complex carbs, you're getting enough omega-3 and MUFAs and PUFAs. Then this is taken care of. Then move to the third layer. Am I doing enough strength training? Am I doing progressive overload? Now, this is another very, a sort of place where people misunderstand. More so women. Men usually tend to do a lot of progressive overload, right? Because there is a certain aesthetic aspect associated with it. Women will be lifting the same weight consistently for years and thinking that they're doing progressive overload. That's not progressive overload. That's just metabolic load. You're just burning calories in the gym. You have to be increasing the kind of stress that your muscles are dealing with, whether it's in reps, whether it's in weight, whether it's in variation. Right? You're progressively growing. You're putting stress on your bone and your muscles. You're also doing some jump training. So make sure you're getting progressive overload at least 3 days a week. Right? Then you move to the top and say, okay, now let me look at my central nervous system. Am I able to calm down when I need to calm down? Is my stress managed? Is my life sort of designed where I have enough emotional support, mental support? I'm consuming the right kind of content, having the right kind of conversations. Am I stressing my brain from a healthy standpoint enough? Am I learning new things every day? Am I working on new neural pathways growing? When that is also checked, then your pyramid is completely taken care of. Now let's talk about what is the great stack that I should create for optimizing my health.
Now, what about these trending things like blue light and red light, and then plasma replacement and all? What, like, I have gone through a lot of podcasts of
Right.
Brian, so I'm coming
I was staying away from taking his name, but yes,
yeah,
when it
it's
comes
okay.
to
I mean,
biohacking,
like we can openly talk about it because he can. So
he's quite out there.
Yeah. So what do you think about all of that?
Great. Okay. So exactly what I was saying. This is the biggest misconception that's out there, right? That biohacking is doing what Brian Johnson is doing. I'll be very honest, if you really follow him, initially my reaction also was like, what the hell? I mean, everybody is not a billionaire sitting here to look at their bio data and say, let's take my kids' plasma and become younger. And I don't think I want to do that, even though I do like the whole research and the way stem cell therapy, etc., and peptide therapy is growing. I'll be honest, that's all of the places that I'm researching, doing, experimenting in. But because we're talking about everybody here, right? We're talking about people getting started and without guidance, somebody doing this on their own. I don't talk about peptide therapies. Forget plasma and stem cells. Right? All of this has to be done under clinical guidance. Please do not buy stuff from the internet and start injecting yourself just like that. Even peptides, for that matter, works beautifully, can be fabulous. They're fabulous signaling agents, nothing to do with steroids, but needs to be done under the right conditions. Your fundamentals have to be in place. I'll give an example of something super simple. I'll not even get into plasma. BPC 157 is a very, very popular peptide. Right? It's super popular because it supports with inflammation regulation, regeneration, repair. A lot of athletes, when they get hurt, are injecting it. I've experimented with it. I actually love it from an inflammatory standpoint. A lot of people I work with, I use it. But it's a research peptide. It's not a supplement that's out there. Now, with any peptide, okay, let's go closer to home actually. I jumped a little further. Let's talk about Mounjaro. Mounjaro is out there, OTC. I mean, you've got a prescription for it, you can get it. Itna so ki fake Mounjaro became available in the market because everybody wants to lose weight and they're getting on Mounjaro. What is it? Just like insulin, it's a signaling molecule. It's not a supplement, it's a signaling molecule. Since Mounjaro became so famous, I've had at least 10 women come to me saying, I've been put on Mounjaro by my doctor. I've been doing it for 6 months. I've not lost any weight. It's supposed to make you lose weight like crazy. I lost 4-5 kgs initially and then I've plateaued and I'm just increasing my Mounjaro dose. EJ, much better example than BPC. BPC went a complete different direction. So why is it happening? What we are not understanding is that all of these biohacks and the peptides and the therapies we're talking about, they're not miracles. They're not going to replace your fundamental biology. They're signaling molecules, right? So when you are putting a signal in a system that is not primed to do anything else, the signal is going to get lost as noise. You first have to have a fundamental physiological or a biochemical makeup in place to be able to respond to a signal. And going back to Brian Johnson, if you really go deep and listen to the poor guy, he's only got famous for the plasma replacements and the crazy things that he does in terms of spending money. He also talks about fundamentals only. He'll talk about sleep, right? So the fundamental pyramid has to be done first. Then you add things to optimize. That's why I say do this first. Then let's talk about what's the supplement, what's the biohack that I can add.
The second part of the pillar, the nutrition, it often said like usually our body does not need so much of food or calories. When a person goes in fasting stage, now different kind of fasting stage is there, something I have done personally, but coming from a Jain background, like they do one meal a day, and sometimes they'll go without food for the entire day and they continue it for a week, that too having water only fixed time in a day. Now that's more of ritual thing, but a person body in a fasted state, what happens at a cellular level, and autophagy when achieved in a fasted state, how does it program or reprogram our body?
Fabulous. Very deep question. So I'm going to answer the second part first. What does autophagy do? And then I'll come to the other part, because I want to talk about fasted, not fasted, because we spoke so much about nutrition. So number one, when we're in a deep fasted state, right? While yes, there is a parameter which says around 72-ish hour autophagy gets triggered, but there are many, many, many nuances, right? Sleep accelerates, fasted sleeping accelerates autophagy. Working out fasted really accelerates autophagy. So you can achieve it faster, different peaks depending on how the fasting is done. What autophagy does, think of it as cleaning your house. When we are living, our cells are consistently regenerating, right? I like to think of it this way. From a purely biological standpoint, every single aspect of this earth, or the living aspect of this earth, purely has one evolutionary signal to reproduce. Purely, I'm not talking about culture, humans at all, just purely biologically, right? All of us are wired to just reproduce, because that's how a species survives. A virus is going to quickly reproduce, two dogs are going to quickly sort of, because at a biological standpoint, at a very core level of life is to make sure the species takes over the earth. So same thing is happening inside our body. Every single cell is primed or coded to live a certain period till it's healthy, do the job that it's supposed to do as per the DNA's code. When it is achieving a point of getting done, or let's say dying, it is going to create two daughter cells. It is going to give it the same code and the DNA and say, ab tum jaake ye karo. And then it dies. The cells are also coded enough to say when the cell dies, our other cells are going to eat the dead cell to be able to clean it up. Otherwise, in the body, you can't have like dead cells accumulating, right? But the kind of life that we are living, because we are constantly on the go, this also with age, because this constant regeneration, the buildup of dead cells when they start to accumulate, cell senescence when that starts to accumulate, the cleaning up process and the regeneration process and the efficacy or the efficiency of the mitochondria and the cells start to become slower. Exactly like any machine. When you go into a deep fasted state, you're allowing the body to pause and actually clean itself up, clean all of this dead buildup. So autophagy is literally it eating all the dead buildup. That is why the ability to generate energy, the ability to regenerate, the ability to look young, feel younger, that becomes much more when you've achieved autophagy, or even when it happens inside the mitochondria. The mitochondria, because it's consistently creating energy, there are byproducts that are getting released. That also needs to get cleared out, right? So even inside the mitochondria, the cleaning up happens when you're even further into a fasted state. So that is why it enhances health span. The second part is when we look at it purely from a spiritual standpoint, right? Because you spoke about coming from a Jain background. There, the fasting state is happening from a very spiritual standpoint. It's not to a large extent, to some extent, yes, it's going to help health, but it's not from the perspective of I want to live longer, I want to live healthier. There the perspective is, and it's too deep for us when we're talking about biohacking to understand, right? Because it is from the perspective of saying this body is purely a vessel, this world is purely, obviously not a commentary on the religious belief, my understanding of it is to then go beyond what you and I are talking about. To say, okay, it's not about the pleasures and the desires of this physical body. It is now beyond this. So how do I not give in to the desires? And I always say this from my perspective, that gluttony is one of the biggest sins, which all of us are sinning. Right? We have conversations about vegetarian, non-vegetarian, and I say, let's even come out of that and understand that, the sins that another religion talks about is gluttony. It is a sin. And aren't all of us doing that? We are purely eating for pleasure. So even if you're eating a plant for pleasure, you're still taking life.
Yeah, I totally agree. I cannot agree more.
So I think gluttony pehle band kar dete hain. And then our spiritual evolution, so I think from a biohacking perspective, we shouldn't talk about. But yes, fasted state, purely from improving our physical health and our lifespan, which spiritually we wouldn't want to do or we shouldn't want to do, is supporting by cleaning the system. It's like shutting the house or a office services and saying, let's do a deep cleanse. Now, there are nuances here, again, purely physical health standpoint, right? When it works, when it doesn't work, when you should do, you shouldn't do. A lot of people take it real extreme and do it as an everyday life. Now, here is where it backfires. If you're only cleaning the office, will the office ever do what it's open to do? So you should do deep cleaning, but then also do the functioning. For the functioning, you need to give it nutrition and then pause and do the deep cleaning. That's how the system works. And then other nuances, if there's a woman going through perimenopause, there's a lot that the body is already doing. Now, you don't want to stress the body by saying, safai karo. Right now, you support the body. When somebody is going through hormonal dysfunctions like a thyroid or an autoimmune disease also, now the body is already going through stress and repair. Now the body requires support. So now don't push the body to say, okay, let me add some more stress and put you under a state of hunger so that you can clean home. So those are, of course, bio-individual aspects we should take into consideration. But a healthy individual should time and again have a pause from the system of digestion to be able to clean.
On a cellular level, I want to talk about NMN and NAD. So let's still stick to the topic of in a fasted state. On a cellular level, I know the cleanup is happening. There is also a saying goes with that fasted state के अंदर cancer cells भी मर जाते हैं उसके साथ में. And let's say a person is following all the pyramid structure 6 days and one day he fixes that, okay, this is my cleaning day. What should be the frequency if one needs to introduce after following the pyramid structure, how the frequency should be given, and for men and women, how it should be different?
So not just for men and women, also here bio-individuality comes into place. So we have to look at a lot of things. Your age, your biomarkers at that point in time. So not only following the pyramid, make sure that there are no hormonal imbalances, there's no adrenal stress, there is no inflammation, there is no infection, there are a lot of things, right? So I don't like to put a generic statement as to what should be done, but a good rule of thumb. Ideally, if somebody who's not a woman going through menopause, or somebody who's sick, obviously, or kind of fighting an ailment, does a everyday intermittent fasting window, which is more from a time-restricted eating standpoint, right? So it's not extended IF, but time-restricted eating, where you're giving your body enough of a gap, which I think is really, really necessary, between finishing the last meal and sleeping, so that when you're sleeping, that very fundamental repair and cleaning that should be happening every day in your 24-hour cycle, let's support that first. So that becomes the first step. Give it that break, let the digestion completely get done 3 hours, which means your last meal 3 hours before bed, so that the first process of cleaning and repair is happening. Now on top of that, if you want to add it, ideally if you are working out, if somebody who is still working on rebuilding, regenerating sort of muscle, bone health, etc., then doing it once a month, twice a week is great. Somebody who says, no, I'm not really interested in putting on a lot of muscle, I just want to sustain, I don't want to work out too much, a little bit, then you can do a once a week. And obviously don't have extended fast, like I see people doing 17, 18 hour fasted windows every single day. and then fasting for a good 48 hours once a week. Now, this is overdoing it, right? Because you're barely eating, and then how are you going to get all the nutrition in? So just prime the repair regeneration for sleep. That should happen fundamentally for everybody, man, woman, age group. Even when you're recovering from an ailment, giving the body that time to be able to repair. I also want to put a caveat, I'll come back to that. So ailment ka, we'll come back. But otherwise, if you are doing this right, a good extended fasting window for a non-perimenopausal, menopausal woman once to twice a month is good enough. And once or twice a month. And of course, pushing for good autophagy, right? So you're doing like a nice 24-hour, 48-hour fasting window.
And if you're doing IF regularly, suppose you're just eating in a certain window, specifically for women, I'm asking, that also works.
So for women, I like to say do more from the lens of time restricted eating and not intermittent fasting, which means what you want to focus on is just finishing dinner 3 hours before bed. That's number one, right? For some women, because adrenals do become sensitive when we're going through the transition, if it is disrupting sleep, because what happens is blood sugar declines, the cortisol rises, so you'll have like a 3-4 a.m. waking up scenario happening very often in women who are perimenopausal. Then even before sleep, have a little bit of fat. So have some MCT or coconut oil, or if even that's not helping, then a little collagen or raw honey with it. Right? So you're giving just the fuel to buffer the morning cortisol rise, because otherwise sleep is getting disrupted, which the basic fundamental part of the pyramid is getting disrupted. If that's not the case, your metabolic health is completely primed and your metabolic health is already taken care of, then if you eat dinner 3 hours before bed, you should be able to fall asleep, stay asleep without any issues. As soon as you wake up in the morning, not only sunlight, but make sure you're replenishing your system with a healthy fat, amino acids. So ideally, at least 10 to 20 grams of protein and a little bit of omega-3 or a healthy fat or a MCT oil or a coconut oil. And if you're going to work out in the morning, then about 10 to 20 grams of carbs. This is for a woman. Man can go more extended windows. A man can do a 14-hour, 12-hour, 16-hour, but then don't do a 24, 48-hour at the end of the week.
What's your take on NMN and NAD supplementation when it comes to cellular health and age reversing?
This is like the question when people think NMN and NAD is like a miraculous age reversal drug because David Sinclair said so. So, and I get a lot of feedback when I say what I'm about to say, ki, oh, you don't know, he's Harvard. Yes, he is researching in very extremely controlled environments. And yes, NMN and NAD are fabulous. But not for a system that's completely compromised, broken and inflamed. It's going to do nothing. Right? What NMN does is supports mitochondrial health. It will support mitochondrial health when the rest of the pyramid is taken care of. You're giving your body what it needs, it will support. Secondly, when somebody really wants a mitochondrial pick-me-up or, sort of like, let's say, age reversal of the mitochondria, IV is going to work much better. Oral is just slow doses, not really going to do the kind of miraculous regeneration that you're looking for.
To sum it up, I have one question to ask you. First of all, thank you for explaining everything so beautifully. I mean, it's like a wake-up call and it's so clear, like as if I felt like I'm sitting in a classroom and a very good teacher is explaining everything. No, I really like everything got so clear in my head, whatever you explained. Now, I understood from whatever you explained, but someone who wants to do it, but don't want to do, don't know how to do, like biohacking and checking the biomarkers and go towards this path of longevity or in fact just living a healthy life. How professionals like you can help in this
fair
journey?
So I'd say number one, start with the pyramid anyway, right? You don't need somebody like me to help you with the pyramid. Sometimes you do because some people just can't figure sleep out. Second thing, I've tried to make my and other people's life easier because what I realized is, I'll tell you how I work. So when somebody comes to me, the first thing I want to do is look at your lifestyle, your own symptoms, your blood work, minimal. That I know exactly what's going on, explain what's going on, so that then you can not just do what I'm asking you to do now, but actually fix the system. What I realized is there are only that many people I can work with. right? And if I'm being very honest, the cognitive drain on me is also a lot. How many people can you help at one point in a time? I've started putting a lot of information out there, and I keep telling people, please educate yourself on this information. A lot is freely available. I've just, on my birthday, I just released a community. It's called Biology by Age, where I'm putting the biology dashboard. I'm going to be putting the basic design stack, this pyramid, how to do it, what to do, so that people can educate themselves and actually start taking charge of their own health. Ideally, what I want to achieve with the work that I'm doing is give people the tools so that they can become the designers of their own biology. They can become biohackers genuinely, without thinking about, okay, what a Brian Johnson is doing, or even what Tanya's talking about on Insta. So I want, and this is what I'd urge people who want to get on this journey, is that please get yourself equipped with these tools, right? I'm putting it out there. I know of a lot of other people who are putting it out there, so that you're able to now understand what's going on with your body, your own bio-individuality from time to time, and then start strengthening the pyramid more and more. Well, of course, if there is a disease, obviously get support. If there is optimization tools like peptides, etc., once you've taken care of the pyramid, then get support. Don't do that on your own. But fundamentals we can absolutely do on our own.
So before we wrap up, we will play a final round, myth or not. We'll say a statement. You can say it's a myth or not. If you want, you can also explain that.
Got it.
First question. Supplements can completely replace a healthy diet.
No. It can support it, it can't replace it.
Chronic stress can physically age the body faster.
Absolutely. 100%.
Sleeping less than 6 hours regularly can impact brain function long term.
100%.
Hormonal imbalances are becoming more common in younger people today.
Unfortunately, yes. At least that's the data I'm seeing.
You can boost your metabolism permanently with certain foods.
Nothing in biology is permanent. We're all consistently changing, consistently responding. Everything around you, knowingly, unknowingly, is a signal. So nothing will happen permanently. But yes, making consistent, healthy choices will stack up to strengthen that system.
Inflammation may be linked to many chronic diseases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fasting can activate certain cellular repair process in the body.
It 100% can, but we spoke about the nuances about doing it right.
Something we haven't spoken. Cold showers and ice baths dramatically increases lifespan.
Not dramatically. Again, like we spoke about, it's a biohack that will really support a strong fundamental system. It's not a miraculous biohack.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. I mean, I'm feeling so refreshed after this conversation.
No, there's certain learnings we always take from certain podcasts, no matter we are doing it at our level, but now you have put a lot of perspective at place. Now we know okay, what we are doing wrong and what we have to do right.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for having this conversation. It's very, very necessary. We start talking about the aspects of actually taking charge of your health.
Thank you for watching this absolutely amazing episode. I'm sure you guys have learned a lot. If you guys have any question about this episode, go ahead and ask in the comment below. And do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much.